Fried dough traditions around the world. Cultures all over the world have been consuming fried dough for centuries. Traces of fried dough foods have been found in prehistoric Native American settlements, and sweetened fried doughs are known to have been eaten by the ancient Romans and Greeks. The history of the donut itself is generally traced to Dutch immigrants in 17th and 18th century New York, then New Netherland, who prepared fried dough balls called oliekoeken or oliekoeks, which means oil cakes. They were similar to modern donuts, although they did not yet have the iconic ring shape. Instead, the dough balls were stuffed with fruits and nuts in the middle, to work around the problem of the dough that otherwise would be at the center of the ball cooking more slowly than the rest of the treat. What is a donut? Originally called oliekoeks, oil cakes in Dutch, the first donuts date back to the 15th century and were simply round blobs of deep-fried batter. Nowadays, when we think of the modern donut, it's usually a choice between ring donuts and filled donuts, but now there are many contemporary twists on this classic fried treat. Cronuts, beignets, and churros have all come into the spotlight in recent years. Pastry chef Dominique Ansel created the cronut in New York in 2013, and it is inspired by the donut, shaped like a ring donut but made with croissant pastry. A beignet, also called a French donut, is commonly served in New Orleans, but dates back as far as ancient Roman times. It is a type of deep-fried batter, either with yeast-risen pastry or decadent choux pastry. Churros, delicious long tubes of deep-fried choux pastry, originated in Spain and Portugal, and they are often dipped in hot chocolate or café con leche. But can they really be called donuts? The Cambridge Dictionary states a donut is a small, circular cake, fried in hot fat, either with a hole in the middle or filled with jam. That leaves the cronut out, as it is baked not fried. A beignet is also out of the question, as it is neither a ring shape or filled. The churro is sometimes served in a ring shape, but its crunchy texture means it has none of the doughy, cakey texture expected from a classic donut. Delicious as they are, we will leave them to one side to contemplate another variation, the dough. Different kinds of dough. Within our now officially recognized filled donut and ring donut, there is still a variation in the dough used. Chemically raised donuts, or cake donuts, use baking powder as the raising agent, and the ingredients include flour, salt, eggs, milk, sugar, fat and flavorings. Resulting in a more cake-like texture, these donuts are sweeter in taste and denser in texture, and usually found as ring donuts. The fried. Let's start as basic as it gets, a fried donut dusted in sugar. Nothing fancy, just simple goodness. Ingredients: 100 milliliters warm water, 150 milliliters warm milk, 2 teaspoons dry yeast, 50 grams sugar, 2 eggs, 100 grams butter, 500 grams flour, pinch of salt, oil, for frying, sugar, to coat. Instructions: mix the warm water with the yeast and a bit of the sugar, continue mixing until the yeast has dissolved. Let it rest for a bit so that the yeast can activate, it will get bubbly, or at least some bubbles should form. Add the remaining sugar, milk, salt and eggs into the mix. Melt the butter and add it into the dough, then start mixing it while gradually adding the flour. Continue working the dough until you get it smooth. Cover the bowl with a damp kitchen towel and let it rest for about an hour in a warm place. Once the dough has risen, roll it out on some flour until it is fairly thin, 0.25 centimeters, or 0.25 inches thick. And cut out the donut shape with either a donut cutter or simply use a largish glass and a small cookie cutter for the characteristic shape. Going at it with a knife to freehand the shapes is another way to go about it, but it will take a bit longer. Set the cut-out donuts aside and continue rolling out and cutting out until the whole dough has been used up. Heat up some oil in a deep pan and carefully lower the donuts one by one. You can test if the oil is hot enough by throwing in a scrap of dough. You'll see how it'll react. Fry the donut on both sides until it is golden brown and let the excess oil drip off on paper towels. While the donuts are still fairly hot, you can toss them in sugar to coat them. Baked goodness. Another easy recipe, but this time without yeast. There are tons of recipes that you can choose from with or without yeast, the choice is yours. Ingredients: 200 milliliters water. 100 grams butter. 120 grams flour. 4 eggs. Instructions. Melt the butter in the water and bring it to a boil. Let it simmer and add in the flour. Mix this until the whole mixture gets smooth and forms a ball. Place the dough in a bowl and let it cool off for a bit. Crack in the eggs and mix until the dough is smooth again. Pipe the dough into a donut pan of your choice and bake at 200 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 20 minutes or until they are golden brown in color. Donuts have a somewhat labyrinthine and, at times, shady past. From when they arrived in America, donuts have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and, thanks to a rather ragtag bunch of characters, they are now one of the most iconic American pastries. In fact, Smithsonian.com notes that, in its democratic ethics, its optimism, and its assorted origins, the donut does seem rather quintessentially American. Donuts have become the poster child of everyday indulgence thanks to a melting pot of influential characters, historical happenstance, and sweet tooths, and many, many pans filled with hot oil. Dutch settlers introduced donuts to the U.S. when they ended up in Manhattan, then known as New Amsterdam. They called these donut predecessors oliekoeks or oily cakes, which were fried in pork fat. Formed by dropping dough off the end of a spoon, their name evolved to oliebollen, or oily balls, thanks to their irregular round shape. Unlike today, oliebollen were traditionally enjoyed during the Christmas season, and each cook had his or her own, individualized recipe. What else is round, fried, and perfect for the holiday season? These smoky chickpeas. So why don't we indulge in coffee and an oliebollen? Besides the fact that, no offense to the Dutch, oily balls is not an especially catchy name, there are a few theories. Some speculate that the term donut could refer to the nuts the desserts were often stuffed with, or the nut shape into which they were sometimes tied. We assume that donut abbreviation came out of pure, old-fashioned laziness, and the American love of shortening every word in sight. Imported image. While we know who introduced the donut to American soil, the story behind the donut hole is a bit less clear-cut. The most likely, and mundane, explanation is that the donut hole was brought about by pure necessity. At some point, bakers started adding egg yolks to their recipe, which yielded a richer dough. However, this meant that the donut center no longer cooked at the same rate as its edges, resulting in doughy, raw centers. Solution: remove the chubby middle, and the donut cooks into a perfectly rich, crispy pastry. However, there is a more entertaining, whimsical story behind the donut's hole. In the mid-19th century, there lived a woman named Elizabeth Gregory who made a darn fine oliekoek. She spiced hers with nutmeg, cinnamon, and preserved lemon rind, and would pock them up for her son, a sea captain, to help him ward off scurvy and hunger on long ocean voyages. It is her son who claims credit for inventing the donut hole. As he tells it, he was steering the ship through some especially treacherous seas and had taken along some of his mother's pastries for nourishment. Since he had to keep both hands on the ship's wheel in order to keep her steady, he had no choice but to stick the donut onto the spokes of the wheel to keep them within reach.